Welcome back to Variety Homestead. Glad you could join me today. I'm going to give an Easter encouragement, to all the readers and listeners and watchers. We really appreciate you giving time to the channel. And I'm going to read some thoughts, and I'm also going to share with you some of what the Bible has to say about the week we call Holy Week and the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, which is called in the Christian world the Easter. So it's a holy day celebrated all over the world where there are people who call themselves Christians all over the world. I thought it would be appropriate for those folks out there that watch various videos for different reasons to offer a message of encouragement and comfort that could benefit you who do not yet know some of the reasons why this particular day is celebrated in the first place. In the history of religions all over the world, there have been days that have been celebrated as holy days for one reason or another. But in this, Christianity is unique because the forgiveness and salvation that is available through Jesus Christ to all of us who will believe and trust can't be had by doing good works and good deeds and benevolent acts. It is only available to us because of what Jesus did. And it is in many ways solidified and validated by those events leading up to the one event in history that makes Christianity stand alone. For those of you who might not be familiar with the details and want to know more, I'm going to relate much of that to you today. And you can look into the following places in the Christian Bible, which is known to us as the Holy Bible here in the United States. The books and passages in the Bible that deal with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ are Matthew chapters 26 through 28, Mark chapters 14 through 16, Luke chapters 22 through 24, and John chapters 18 through 21. Each of these chapters are in the four books that are commonly called the Gospels. And they relate essentially the same account, but with some different details in each, by which we can put the whole thing together. I highly encourage you to read all of these chapters for yourself today or over the next few days. Now, that term gospel, G-O-S-P-E-L, it's an Old English word that means good news. And the four Gospels tell the account of Jesus's birth, life, teaching, death, burial, resurrection from the dead, and his ascension into heaven, from which he will return very soon to judge those left in the world for rejecting his salvation. And it's because God loves us. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says, "But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." The love of God is described throughout the pages of the Bible from the very beginning. Mankind's fall and God's plan of redemption. You know that when you break the law, you have to be prepared to face the consequences of that, right? The only way around that is either to be acquitted or to have the offense forgiven. Jesus does both. His sacrifice on the cross way back when paid the penalty due for all of us breaking God's law, effectively acquitting us of our guilt. And he forgave us for the offense at the same time. The result is that we have an eternal home in heaven in the presence of God. The bad news for all people is that we are born sinners ever since Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden. So death passed to all people because all sinned since then. You can find those accounts in Romans chapter 3, verse 23, and Romans chapter 5 in verse 12. Now, at the time of physical death, we are spiritually separated from any chance of redemption, and we face an eternity in hell. All of us know instinctively that we are unique creations of God and that there's an existence after earthly death. We can feel that in our very being, even though there are some folks out there that claim to be atheists. Now, if they're right and there is no God at all, then trusting in Jesus for your eternal soul's destination does you absolutely no harm whatsoever. However, if they're wrong, then it is eternal suffering on an unimaginable scale that is in the future for anybody and everyone who rejects Christ. Accordingly, there are also so-called Christian groups out there that say that in the end, everybody's going to be saved anyway, and we're all going to wind up in heaven. Well, if that's true, then why would Jesus need to come to earth and suffer the brutality and the death he suffered in order for us to be saved from an eternity in hell? That just doesn't line up for me. But there's also some good news here. The good news for you and me, and the reason that Easter is celebrated all over the world today, is that Jesus died for our sins, paying the penalty required by God. He was buried, and on the third day, he rose from the dead. That resurrection validated his conquering of death itself and gave you and I the opportunity to be reconciled to God through Jesus' own sacrifice. So today, as I read through the scriptures, and I'll give you a little bit of explanation as we go along, I hope you will enjoy this, and thanks again for visiting. So you want to understand that the plot to kill Jesus originated with folks who hated him. And I'm going to start reading from Matthew chapter 26, verse 1, and read down a little bit so that you can understand that there was this plot because of what he was teaching, that he himself was salvation, and in him was salvation. And the religious elites at the time rejected that. And so what they did, beginning in Matthew chapter 26, verse 1 says, "When Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples, 'You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion.' Then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest, named Caiaphas." That's the name of the high priest. "And they plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, 'Not during the festival, otherwise a riot might occur among the people.'" And then I'm going to skip down to where Judas Iscariot bargains to betray Jesus. Verse 14 in Matthew 26. "Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, 'What are you willing to give me to betray him to you?' And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver to him. From then on, he began looking for a good opportunity to betray Jesus." And then we're going to go to the last Passover, verse 20, Matthew chapter 26. "Now when evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12 disciples, and they were eating, and he said, 'Truly I say to you that one of you will betray me.' Being deeply grieved, they each one began to say to him, 'Surely not I, Lord.' And he answered, 'He who dipped his hand with me in the bowl is the one who will betray me. The Son of Man is to go, just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born.' And Judas, who was betraying him, said, 'Surely it is not I, Rabbi?' Jesus said to him, 'You have said it yourself.'" And this actually instituted what the Christian church observes calling the Lord's Supper. So now we're going into the Garden of Gethsemane. So they finished the Lord's Supper and they're going into the Garden of Gethsemane. So Matthew chapter 26, verse 36 says, "And then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to his disciples, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and distressed." And you'll find out in another gospel account that was James and John that he took with him, and Peter. So as Peter, James, and John actually went with the Lord into the garden to apart from the rest of them to pray. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done. And he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them again and went away and prayed a third time, saying the same thing once more. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand. So moving on into verse 47 of Matthew chapter 26, it says, While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up, accompanied by a large crowd with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him gave them a sign, saying, Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him. Immediately Judas went up to Jesus and said, Hail, Rabbi, and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, Friend, do what you have come for. Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus reached and drew out his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Another gospel account, one of the other gospel accounts, I think it may be John, gives you the name of the high priest's servant. His name was Malchus. Then Jesus says in verse 52, Jesus said to him, Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Or do you not think that I can appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? A legion was like 6,000 men, so you're talking about 72,000 angels if Jesus would have just said the word, but he didn't. He didn't. He allowed himself to be taken. How then will verse 54, how then will the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it must happen this way? In verse 55, at that time Jesus said to the crowds, Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber? Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets. Then all the disciples left him and fled. Okay, I'm moving to Matthew chapter 27 now. Now when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. That's Pontius Pilate. Another interesting thing here before I go on is in another gospel, it actually shows a previous trial that occurred, and that was an illegal trial because it happened in the middle of the night. They didn't have everybody there. It was a complete illegal trial for the Jews to have at that particular time. So in the morning, they've now bound him and they're taking him away and delivering him to Pontius Pilate, who is the Roman governor of the province of Judea at that particular time. So now in verse 11, we've skipped down some verses, and now in verse 11, Jesus is actually in front of Pilate. And it says, Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, It is as you say. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. So he did answer Pilate that one time, but he would not answer the chief priests and the elders. Then Pilate said to him, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And he did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the people any one prisoner whom they wanted. Understand, this is the feast of the Passover, and they're in Jerusalem at this particular time. Verse 16, Matthew 27. At that time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that because of envy they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him a message saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for last night I suffered greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, saying, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather than a riot starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, "His blood shall be on us and our children." Amazing prophecy there. Then he released Barabbas for them, but having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. So here we go. Verse 27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. That's about 600 soldiers, rough and tough. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spat on him and took the reed and began to beat him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off of him and put his own garments back on him and led him away to be crucified. As they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. So I'm going to stop here to tell you that the scourging that the Romans gave Jesus was just about killed him. It was a very, very bad scourging with the whip. And there's other accounts in Luke, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm reading from Matthew, but in Mark, Luke, and John, you can hear more details or read more details about the various aspects of Roman scourging and things like that. And there's historical accounts of just how bad it was. So here's the actual crucifixion itself in chapter 27, verse 33. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots. So you understand, this is very easy to understand. When they put him on the cross, they took all of his clothes off of him. So he was bare naked on the cross. And they stuck him up there bare naked. Not an unusual practice back then. So, but it's a huge form of humiliation in front of people. Verse 36, and sitting down, they began to keep watch over him there. And above his head, they put up the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." And at that time, 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him and saying, he saved other people, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross and we will believe him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now, if he delights in him. For he said, I am the Son of God. The robbers who had been crucified with him were also insulting him with the same words. Now from the 6th hour, darkness fell upon all the land until the 9th hour. So in the reckoning of time at that particular time, the 6th hour would have been 12 noon. And it says darkness fell upon all the land until the 9th hour. So that would have been until 3 p.m. So 6, 7, 8, 9, right? About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, this is verse 46, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of those who were there standing, when they heard it, began saying, this man is calling for Elijah. And Elijah was a great Old Testament prophet. Verse 48, immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. That must have been absolutely wild. Verse 54, now the centurion and those who were with him, keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, truly, this was the Son of God. Many women were there looking from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Verse 57, when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, sitting opposite the grave. Now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I am to rise again. Therefore, give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, he has risen from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, you have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how. And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. Now, this is really, really interesting as we go to chapter 28. Chapter 28. Now, after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come, see the place where he was lying. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. And they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to report it to his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they came up and took hold of his feet and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee, and there they will see me." Now, while they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, "You are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this should come to the governor's ears, we will win him over and keep you out of trouble." And they took the money and did as they had been instructed. And this story was widely spread among the Jews and is to this day. Now, that's another interesting piece, because Roman soldiers would have been killed for sleeping on guard duty, plain and simple. So they made a deal with the Jewish rulers at the time that they were going to say, "Well, the disciples came and stole while we were asleep." But the Jewish rulers at the time made a deal with them that they would keep them safe from the governor's wrath if they were to report that to the common people and use that as an excuse to say that's why he's not in the grave. So it was pretty common knowledge that the grave was empty. It wasn't a speculation. It was known that the grave was empty. And the guards actually saw a lot of what happened. So they just refused to believe it. It's really interesting. So we're going to finish up here in Matthew chapter 28. And this is an abbreviated account. Like I say, in the other three Gospels, Mark, Luke, and John, you're going to get a whole lot more around this that's going to flesh a lot of this out for you, so you get a lot more details. Matthew 28:16. But the 11 disciples, remember Judas, I didn't read it, but Judas regretted having done what he did. He tried to give the money back to the Pharisees that he made the deal with, and they refused the money back, and he threw it at him, and then he went out and hanged himself. They took the money and bought the field that Judas's body fell into after he hanged himself, and they called it the Field of Blood because it was purchased with blood money. So there's only 11 disciples left at this point. So in Matthew 28, verse 16, it says, "But the 11 disciples proceeded to Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had designated. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some were doubtful. And Jesus came up and spoke to them, saying, 'All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age.'" Now look, that's called in the Christian world as the Great Commission, for the disciples to go out, and it extends to you and me. And one of the reasons why I'm making this Easter encouragement video is to encourage you to trust the Bible, trust in Jesus for salvation. He's the only thing. He's the only way to heaven. And it's only through him that any of us have any hope at all. I hope this has been an encouragement to you, and I really, truly hope that you will read the rest of the account so that you can put the whole story together for yourself and see how it turns out. And if you decide to, read the rest of the Bible as well. Start at the beginning and run all the way through. And it's amazing how it just comes together with a great continuity of God's eternal plan of redemption. I hope you have a blessed Easter, and thank you very much for visiting Variety Homestead.